Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the pod by Shiptember, and I'm delighted to welcome on an absolute legend, Lorin Wood. Welcome, sir.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to chatting with you and just getting to know you. I'm very aware of you over the years, many, many years, primarily from the legendary Nothing But Mech, and then obviously all the amazing stuff you've been doing from there. Yeah. And it's been an absolute inspiration from my journey at many stages and continues to do so. But rather than me just do this for the next hour, just singing your praises, which I'll happily do, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick origin story as to who you are and what you do for the listeners, please.
Okay, so again, thanks for. Actually been a fan, since the inception of your various web pages. Awesome. I didn't know this podcast existed, so I'm excited to be here. Sick. And kind of help build this up as well. So yeah, let me just do a brief summary of who I am. So I come from a massively creative family. My father was a product designer, and so I basically learned to draw at 4 years old, copying his portfolio. And so that kind of set me on a trajectory. And so basically, I was encouraged and basically discovered the work of Syd Mead, who was his college hero that got him pursuing industrial design. And then I discovered Ralph McQuarrie, Niall Rodas Chamorro, and Joe Johnston, who are my heroes. And so kind of merging those things together, that kind of put me on a downward spiral into, where I am right now. And then jump ahead when I'm in high school. Over here in the U.S., we have high school. It's grades 9 to 12, roughly. And so when I was in the 10th grade, so about 16 years old, I started networking professionally. Wow. Because of being an artist, I am a loner for the most part. And, so I had a select number of friends, but I wasn't like, the life of the party type of character.
Right.
So as a result, I compensated by networking. And so my first big connection was a lady named Kim Bromley. And she was a visual effects producer at Industrial Light and Magic back in the early mid 90s. And she married Dave Carson, who joined Industrial Light and Magic during the original Empire Strikes Back. Wow. And so she was kind of like a hub there, a networking hub. And so through her, I got a tour eventually got a tour of the facility in San Rafael when they were still working on Starship Troopers and various other kind of classic, heyday Industrial Light and Magic movies. And that's when the ILM was still very secretive. It was still kind of, it wasn't the, full page spread studio that everyone knows about. It was kind of a very clandestine organization, in this little industrial region north of San Francisco. And so anyway, so she gave us a tour, my dad and I a tour, as I was checking out a design school in San Jose, California.
So is this 16, the tour?
I'm about 17 years old now at this point.
Cool.
And so basically through her, and so because everyone knew who Kim was, I basically had to drop her name. And this is kind of the value of what I learned about networking is discover the hub, and then basically she'll introduce you to everyone else. And so through her, I got to know Ty Ruben Ellison, George Hall, a whole, basically the art department of ILM, kind of the classic art department. And so George and Ty Ruben kind of became, good friends over the years. And but soon after that visit, I actually physically mailed, photocopies of my portfolio at the time, which wasn't bad. And George, gave me a portfolio review over the phone, as he was eating chips or something like that. It was funny. Wow. And so as a teenager, that was a massive ego boost, and of course put me on a trajectory to basically enhance, to work on some things that I was lacking at the point. And so that kind of, and I'm already kind of a hyper fixated individual, so when I get going on something, I basically just like zero in on it. That can be detrimental, in certain areas. But basically, so that put me in a fun spiral into design and entertainment and storytelling, and basically the fusion of all those things and the importance of all those things. And so I have an industrial design background, but that was never really an interest. It's fun to a point. It's fun to have to work towards a trophy or building a trinket or something like that. But when that's like your only end goal, that for me that just kind of bored me, because I've always been a storyteller. I was raised on stories. I was raised on Joseph Campbell. I was raised on mythology and stuff like that. And so this was more of a natural fit for me, is to utilize the kind of the aesthetic engineer that a product designer is basically trained with to become kind of this the synergy of these two disciplines, but as a storyteller. And so at the time, again, this is like the early to mid 90s or so. That was still kind of a new thing. Concept art was the huge thing that it was today. It was very much a niche discipline. And like there were no classes for it. Like you went into a normal discipline like illustration, painting, whatever, and then kind of veered your way into conceptual art, conceptual design. And so that was kind of like, I went, okay, I'm going to do that. And so a few years later, and this, again, I'm sorry, this may be long, but I'm actually condensing decades of time.
Take your time. No worries at all.
So a few years later, I should say, my family had moved to Southern California from Dallas, Texas, because we kind of migrated, went from Massachusetts down to Texas and then California and then back. And so anyway, we moved to California, and I watched the movie, and I was the nerd that would sit in the end of credits throughout a movie and just watch the credits and read the names. I was just curious about who did what, and I kept noticing a name, a guy named David Dozeretz with this company called Persistence Vision, doing this new thing called Previs. And so I looked at that and I went, oh, I recognize that name. And so I went back and flipped through the Art Star Wars books, and I went, oh, there he is right there next to George, designing pod race sequences. So I went to the dial-up internet, my 28A baud internet. I dialed that in, and I tracked him down, and I found his company. And he had left Lucasfilm at that time and started his own company, previous company. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'm interested in what you guys do. If there's ever a need for any design work that you need, and let me know. And so early days of cold calling, pre LinkedIn, pre social media. And so he wrote back to me and said, yeah, can you send me, I'm working on a personal project. Can you send me some, and he gave me kind of a synopsis of a scenario that he wanted me to storyboard. So, and it was character heavy, which is kind of a fun challenge for me, because I'm, as a designer, I do products. I do, I do props, I do vehicles, hard surface sort of things. So that was a fun challenge. And so I set that down to him, and he was working on Peter Pan, and he had just finished Moulin Rouge and was working on Peter Pan. And he basically had the Matrix and Star Wars art department down there. And so he showed my stuff to Ian McKegg, and Ian McKegg said, yeah, use him. He's awesome. And I went, cool. So for me, that was like a feather in the cap. It's like, I love Ian's work. And so he hired me. I went out to LA, or I went down to his apartment in LA at the time, and, spent a week. And we basically, we storyboarded, we acted it out. We storyboarded, this pitch that he was going to throw to 20th Century Fox. And basically just kind of took off from there. And so he's basically kind of been just a good friend and mentor ever since then. And he's kind of pulled me into various projects, and primarily Previs. Previs at the time was a newfangled thing. Now it's been folded back into just kind of the generic pre-production. And that's evolved even further, than what we were doing. But it was a fun experience, because that showed me, okay, here's another avenue that my design skills can actually utilize, where you're not designing just a thing anymore, you're actually designing a shot. And again, that's now being, that's now kind of standard, practice in the industry. Is designers, you get hired for doing keyframes, and you want your work to be as flexible and malleable as possible. So you learn Unreal Engine, you learn, Blender, whatever, but you create an entire shot. So you basically mimic specific type of lighting setups. You have to create a kind of a genre, a mood through your piece, in addition to designing every aspect of that shot. And so, and it's amazing, seeing some of the stuff, that's coming out today. But it was fun kind of being at the precipice of that, the very forefront of that, and having zero idea that it would turn into what it was turning into today. And so, but what that did, for me as a designer, is it made me double down onto the thing that I'm really good at. And this is what I learned from Ty Rubin, is after he left doing art, being an art director at Industrial Light and Magic, and he basically piggybacked on with Guillermo del Toro when he was beginning his career, and he's kind of Guillermo's go-to guy, when he starts up a project, or used to be. But what Ty Rubin would say is like, okay, I only do SketchUp, I do black and white, and I only do hard surface. So he just kind of laid that out, and so that's the type of stuff that he gets called out for. And George Hull is kind of the same way. It's like he was kind of the Wachowskis' go-to guy to kind of lay the foundation for their movies, but he was hired specifically because he understood lighting like no one else. He's also a product designer who basically piggybacked over into fine art, and so he loves kind of classical painting. He tries to infuse a lot of kind of classical technique into his work, no matter what the genre is. And so he also basically kind of created his own very unique aesthetic, that's very identifiable very quickly. And so I basically kind of took the same path. I went, okay, I'm going to be overwhelmed by all of this. There's like no way in a logical state of mind that I would be able to keep up with what's going on in the industry right now. And so basically I went, okay, I'm going to focus in on the one thing that I'm really good at. And incidentally, part of that is also teaching. So I can instruct because I have 30 years of experience in the real world. And I can basically understand how to deconstruct and add context, from an academic standpoint. So in my mind, that's kind of a good fusion of the two things, because a lot of the stuff, so I taught at Art Center for 2 years, a class called Robots and Mechs. It was an elective course. But the one thing I would tell the students there, and they were like rock stars. I mean, the talent that I had in my class blew me away. And so I still pick their brains, so I have them teaching me stuff all the time.
Cool.
But what I would tell them is, okay, so here's a Rorschach test. Rorschach test is, I said, open up ArtStation, and this is not me. Doug Chang has actually said this as well, but it's like, you go to ArtStation, open up the front page, and just scroll through for 5 minutes, and just scroll through all the images, and then shut it off and see if you can remember anything that you just looked at. There's lots of pretty stuff. There's incredible artists out there, but from a design standpoint, and especially if you want to work in entertainment, is you're telling stories through the image. But also I bring in, my industrial design, product designer aspect, whereas you have to have a certain amount of empathy. You're concerned about a human condition, the use of this object. So, there's a story there, there's a scenario, as Syd would call it, is why does this thing exist? Who's going to use it? For what purpose is going to be used? Because that's going to dictate the information that goes into, or physically onto, this prop or this object that you're creating. But that's also going to tell you about who's using it, why they're using it, which is going to dictate like the form language. It's going to dictate the function. So you have all these aspects that go into it that adds substance. So in my mind, a good design is not ephemeral. So it's not like a cheap cell phone where you buy it, you just toss it. This is going to be like an iPhone where it's like, okay, I've got to hold on to this thing. They spent millions of dollars kind of creating these things, and they've kind of slowly over time kind of perfected it. So it's got to fit just in the palm of somebody's hand universally. You can't overextend your thumb to type on it. You have to be able to use it one-handed. I mean, there's all sorts of little aspects that you have to kind of consider. And so I kind of been blowing that out of proportion, from a storytelling standpoint. Obviously, you can't go into that depth when you're working on a film or a game or something like that. They need results, and they need something that also doesn't distract from the story that's being told. It's got to fit within, the context of the narrative that's being told. But, it's got to make sense, and so this is, where Doug Chang's 3-second rule that he learned from George Lucas comes into play, where it's, because George taught him in film, as you're watching, for example, Spaceship. I'm probably butchering this. Somebody, you can go look this up online. For any viewers get out there can actually look this up online. He explains it much better than I do. But he says, George says, okay, you have 3 seconds to show an audience this spaceship, and they have to understand the function of it within those 3 seconds because it's going to be gone. It's going to be on screen, off screen, and then hopefully it's left your mind. It's not going to detract you from the overarching story that you're trying to tell. So you have to understand, okay, where does the pilot sit? What where are the engines? Where what direction does this thing fly in? Is it a good guy? Is it a bad guy? You have to have all the information kind of like encapsulated in a really quick blink of an eye. And that's where that's the power of form language, and that's where Joe Johnston and Ralph McQuarrie were like masters of it. And even Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, it's like they made it. John Howe and I think it was the other guy who basically Alan Lee. Yes, yeah. So Alan Lee and John Howe basically dominated that. They made the absolute kind of picture perfect version of very distinct form language. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. You can tell them instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of the same thing with the less is more principle in design with Joe Johnston. It's like, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? They made it incredibly easy to identify an X-wing from a TIE fighter, Star Destroyer from the good guy, Resistance, Rebel fleet. I mean, it always seems to kind of go back to this nature versus this industrialization kind of idea. And so that's kind of the important thing that I think that I've been trying to kind of push in this point in my career. Kind of the rat race, I'm kind of done with that. It's exhausting. I like to live vicariously through my friends who are still in the industry. Yeah. But I have no qualms, but it's like I don't really want to get into that. I have my own ideas that I want to flesh out now finally. That have kind of been percolating, for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I think now that the industry is kind of in this weird position of it wants to evolve, but at the same time it does not want to evolve. Mm-hmm. This is kind of a good opportunity to kind of to take up that desire and actually kind of create my own thing. And I've got a few ideas that are actually starting to take form after a long period of time. Now that I understand like how best to go about doing it.
Interesting.
But yeah. So okay. Sorry. Yeah. That's kind of a tangent. So anyway, so David kind of got me on this trajectory, and so I worked on a few films with him as a previs artist, and then the writer's strike happened in 2007. I came back to Dallas because I was locked down permanently on a full time on a project. So basically, everyone was kind of cut loose, and so I came back home, and I got hired by a studio I'd worked with prior, Real Effects, which is a small animation studio at the time, and they were basically hired out. They were kind of a contracting art department for Gearbox Software. And Gearbox had been working on Aliens Colonial Marines. They got the rights to do an actual canonized sequel to James Cameron's film, which it is. So again, anyone who's watching this who loves or hates the game, too bad, it's canon. It's official. So anyway, so I got pulled in specifically because I still use pen and marker, in my that's kind of my first go-to method, when I'm designing. And they had actually hired Syd Mead. So Syd was back actually working on that, fleshing out the rest of the Sulaco and a lot of the other environments for the game that was being created at the time. Which was a funny, quick funny side note on that one is that two of the main writers from the Battlestar Galactica reboot were actually they actually wrote the script, but they had never written a game before, so they wrote like this. It's like a 500-page screenplay or something like that. It's like so the original version of Aliens Colonial Marines, like we're going all over the solar system. Like we're going. The ending of the game ends up on Mars. It's kind of like a nod to Doom, and you find an alien queen on top of this crazy Mars building that Syd designed, and of course, budgetarily, like no studio would touch that, in a million years. So we kind of scaled it way down to something that was, traditionally a much more manageable and simplistic alien story, which is basically monsters chasing you. And so I got hired to basically replace Syd because they needed somebody who, the art director was really going for a close follow-up to it. He actually track down the exact type of film stock that the cinematographer used on the movie, so they could actually implement that type of film grain and stuff. Just so they kind of went to the extremes. They were kind of hit or miss, in my opinion. Just my opinion. but it was fun to basically kind of dip my toe into that, because I was kind of given carte blanche because I was raised on Syd Mead's artwork, like a lot of people, but this was a cool opportunity to basically push that, to have an excuse to copy his work. It's this fusion of both of our styles. And so basically I did that, and then funny enough, he and his partner were actually doing a little cross-country trip, and they decided to stop to Dallas on their way back to Los Angeles. And so we took them out to dinner. The art director and the producers pulled me along, and Syd and I kind of hit it off because we ended up knowing, again, since I had been networking since I was a teenager, we actually knew a lot of the same people in Los Angeles. And so we kind of hit it off. And so he and Roger went, okay, next time you're in LA, come by. And so I would make business trips to LA and basically end up just hanging out with Syd. So that lasted for about 10 years. And so we go out there and chit chat, and, invariably, most of the conversations were very casual, just kind of buddy type of chat, chit chats. But, we'd always talk about design, so I went over at one point and he showed me the original pen and markers that he did for Elysium, for Neil Blomkamp, so but he'd had it kind of casually laying around. So you go into his studio and you go, oh yeah, Neil was just over here the other day, and I'm looking at this crazy space station, pen sketch that he just did. And I'm just going and he's like 80 years old at that point. Yeah. Does not use, his muscle memory is so insane. Most of that was just done freehand, so there are no ellipses, no rulers or anything. It's I'm looking at that, and you could feel like your ego death, just rising. But the cool thing about those conversations was, the other thing that I learned really quickly is, to be a good designer is you have to have an insatiable curiosity. Syd was just that. I mean, he had a sharp memory. He remembered people that he knew back in the 50s. In great detail. And he worked on so many different projects that I had no idea that that's the one thing. It's every visit was oh yeah, so I remember when I worked on the interior of the Concorde at one point. It's what? It's yeah, we had this whole nightclub bar and stuff inside of there, and then it's okay. But I learned really quickly that to be a good designer is in this industry is you have to have a pretty good understanding of storytelling structure. Nothing too deep. You're not a screenwriter, but you have to have a basic understanding of what constitutes a good story, and that will inform your design decisions about okay, what's necessary, to be included in this design. Obviously you're playing to an audience, so you have to make it entertaining. You can't just be straight design, cold design guy here. You have to actually, it's got to be fun, at the end of the day. And so that was my belief of, there has to be longevity. So you can't just forget about it 5 minutes after you look at it. You have to, something you have to kind of go back to. And that's why, I've got, a zillion art books back here, is because these are very specific books that I return to all the time. They're not just picture books. I actually reference these things like an academic. I'm going through them and I'm poring over them, and I'm trying to mentally deconstruct, what the artist was thinking of when they did that. And then just because of who I am, I'll reach out to the artist at some point, actually talk to them directly and figure out, okay, what were you thinking? Give me your side of the story of what inspired this design. And so that kind of brings me up to today is that's kind of where my head's at. As a designer, somebody in my age, it's okay, I don't want to be involved in the rat race to the degree that I used to. When you're younger, when you have energy, it's energy and interest. It's I'm interested in telling my own stories now. I absolutely love dipping my toe into somebody else's sandbox whenever I have the chance. But some of the franchises right now are just too big, and there's too many chefs in the kitchen, and it turns into kind of design by committee, in my opinion, where it's okay, we got to meet this demographic, okay, but keep it in this budget, and it's okay, you just destroyed all the fun. Like right there,
Yeah.
the second I get my spidey sense kicks in and I go, okay, you've just destroyed any and all enjoyment of working on this franchise at this point.
What is the perfect kind of like conversational brief you'd like to hear? That is the antithesis to that, even.
Yeah. So I talked with a friend of mine. His name's Matt Ward, and he's another kind of disciple of David Dozeret's. he's now in charge of the cinematics department at Gearbox. And so he moved here, and so I was talking with him, and what's funny about Matt is very much in the same. He's cut from the same cloth as David. He's kind of a little mogul, his own self-made mogul in his own way. His mentor is Robert Zemeckis. So he worked at Image Movers Digital, and so he's got a very hands-on, highly creative way of working and the way of seeing and way of executing his ideas. And so, yeah, he's got some stuff that he has coming on the horizon that he wants to pull me in on. That's kind of like extracurricular, for him outside of his day job. And so, having conversations like that with those type of people, that's the type of thing I jump on. I'm kind of past the point of I got to work for this studio, I've got to work for this game studio, I've got to work for this franchise. I can do all that in my own time. It just for my own pleasure, for my own personal growth. I had, working on, in 2005, I got hired to work on A Scanner Darkly, which was it was a really highly experimental movie. And I got to move back to Austin, which is fun, for 9 months. And, but it was interesting because that kind of fulfilled, kind of a desire that I always wanted, that attracted me to wanting to work at Industrial Light and Magic since I was 14. And so it was a very kind of bohemian, very raw way of working, an environment of working in. It was 100% creativity on something that was highly experimental that may or may not have gone anywhere. But we didn't care because we're all kind of this wonderful like hive mind of creatives with really diverse backgrounds. So they did a nationwide test actually. I don't know if it went outside the U.S., but it was a nationwide test for illustrators, comic artists, fine art painters, and then somehow I got thrown in there. As a designer, I don't know how they pulled me in. But Richard Linklater, the filmmaker, he's an Austin-based filmmaker. He did a super experimental short film, anthology called Awaken Life prior to A Scanner Darkly. And his friend, a guy named Bob Sebastian, who was an MIT computer scientist or something like that. Anyway, he wrote his own software and he did he did this one really funny animated short for way back in the early 90s on MTV. They had a thing called Liquid Television, and they were just a series of, this is kind of like pre-Love, Death, Robots type of anthology. And so MTV did a thing called Liquid Television, and they had a variety of different artists from various studios around the world to kind of just do these fun, heavy metal-esque type of, just kind of like off-the-wall, crazy animated shorts. And so Bob Sebastian did this giant, crazy CG cockroach rampaging through a city, just wreaking havoc. And at the very end, the hero who stops it pops open the top, and it's like this little cheesy hand animated, like traditional 2D cockroach that's at the controls, and and so. But what he did is he actually wrote all the software to actually do that short. And so his experiment was to write this interpolation software for Awaken Life. And what it does is you draw over a keyframe, and then you hit every single keyframe where there's a major piece of movement, where there's a major shift in movement and shape change. And then the software basically guesses everything, all the frames in between. And so he kind of refined that. Awaken Life was just like crazy all over the place. It was kind of nauseating to watch at some point. Yeah. But Scanner Darkly, we had contracts with like Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, Woody Harrelson, and Robert Downey Jr.'s lawyers in the contract saying like, okay, they have to look like the actors. You can't just go crazy and have like their heads turned into corn and just whatever insane thing that they're doing. so we actually created this really, really sharp style guide. So like the top animators that we had in the studio, who are these phenomenal artists, they created a very concise style guide that actually looked like the actors. And that was fun. So Richard Linklater went out and shot the film right down there in Austin to stand in for like Southern California. And it was just shot like on cheesy, super low res, just camcorders at the time. No actors using makeup. Yeah, they didn't do any lighting. There were no costumes. There was literally no makeup. So all the actors looked like slobs. So we got to see them in all their raw, glory. And then we basically did everything. So we did all the post production, we did all the visual effects, we did everything because we were drawing all of it. And so we'd use an updated version of the software, and that was super time consuming. I mean, I did one shot of Winona talking with Keanu walking down the street in Austin. It was a windy day because downtown Austin, it's like you walk into a canyon. It's basically just like air blasts you like a wind tunnel, and so her clothing is like flickering like this, and I had to hand animate all that. And so it was like 800 frames that I had to animate. But what you do is you animate, you do a layer of line art, and then you go back over it and you do a flat layer, then you do a shadow layer, then you do a highlight layer, and it all gets interpolated by the software. And so yeah, that spent me like a week. That was like a week straight working on that, and they ended up just cutting the whole scene. so it was a really time-consuming process, but it was it was a really interesting educational stretch for me as an artist. I was taken way out of my comfort zone, using a software that no one is ever going to use again. It was a total novelty software, and this really, really super autobiographical project, because we had Philip K. It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story, and his daughters were like on board as producers, and they thought, this was our dad's most personal piece, so you better get it right. So we had that pressure. And so it was interesting. It was a really fun time in my career where I got to experience this thing that I always wanted to be part of. Growing up, reading about the early days of Industrial Light Magic and that sort of thing. And so any opportunity there is to be on board a project that's very similar, I will jump on in a heartbeat, because it satiates a particular need, as an artist, as a creative that I have. But I also like getting a steady paycheck, so it's like, it's there's a practicality. I'm a very practical person also. So.
How do you find the balance of that? And sometimes it's a balance that you have to manage. Sometimes you want something that you have to fight for, just to even because you can't really have one or the other. Although you can survive either side, it's best to have both. Is that something you have a kind of like a good battle with, or is it a torturous battle?
I think I think I fit into the category of like tens of thousands of other artists. Is that you have both? You have good days and bad days. I mean, I know a few of kind of who I would call them like kind of A-lister, top tier artists that get all of the kind of the premier projects, and they're good. There's a reason why they get those top tier projects. They're really good. But they rarely have to go through the struggle that kind of your average, artist. And it's not that we're less of an artist than they are, but it's more practical, reasons of like location. Okay, so I'm not in London, so I'm not going to get those really interesting, cool projects. Okay, I had a conversation, briefly with the production designer in the Harry Potter movies, and he was excited to get, having me go out there. And it's like, yeah, well, I'm not even in the UK, so it's like, oh, okay. So I got bumped back down, on the priority level. And so that even happens here in the US. It's like, okay, I had this perfect opportunity. You're a perfect fit. Oh, you're not in Los Angeles. Sorry. It's like, we'll get back. We'll call you. It's one of those type of things.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay, Harold. So that's just kind of the reality of the of the game. Is you have to kind of pick and choose, and that's kind of a tough pill to swallow when you're younger in your career. Is that you want to be part of the coolest projects all the time. You want to work at the coolest studios all the time, and it's like, that's not reality. But you can't really tell somebody that. So they have to experience it. And I think that's part of the growth of being a good designer is that you have to learn to sacrifice some of your desires that may not be practical or even necessary for something that is more meaningful. And so another friend of mine, Mark Cabana, who worked on the prequels and the Matrix sequels and stuff like that, he even told me he's like full freelance, I do whatever I want position right now in his career. And he told me once, he gave me the best advice once, where he said, Lauren, there's always going to be the next big project to work on. Like you need to focus on creating, getting your own portfolio into a position where people come after you because they want your vision, they want your style, they want your ideas. Stop curating everything to somebody else's needs and just focus on your own stuff. The big project is always going to come up on the horizon, so don't worry about that. And so, telling somebody who's young and excited, you don't necessarily want to douse the flame of excitement, but you also want to give them a heavy, hefty spoonful of reality. You have to be patient. It's like you have to just work. They're the old Hollywood adage of it takes 10 years to become a movie star. It's 10 plus years to become a really successful concept artist. It's like, so unless you're in the right place at the right time, so you have Doug Chang's, you have Ryan Church's, you have Feng Zhu's, you have all these characters, Craig Mullins. I mean, they were literally in the right place at the right time. Usually at the precipice of something new that was coming out, something new and novel and interesting, and at a good studio. So a lot of them started off in Industrial Light Magic. So it's like that was kind of like the catalyst for a lot of their careers right there. And they were smart and they basically stayed. A lot of people who jumped off and then took off, they didn't. Their careers kind of plateaued, not necessarily in a bad way, but you look back and it's like, okay, well, Doug is now in charge of everything Star Wars. Ryan Church is like basically Doug's position. He's like the rock star, premier art director at Industrial Light Magic, and so it's not really a simple answer. It's something you gain by experience, and you have to kind of learn to sacrifice some of your own wants and needs because they're not necessarily going to be completely logical or necessary. You have to kind of be pragmatic, and you have to see what's reasonable and take what's coming at you. And kind of like Michael Caine, you just do a zillion movies, both good and horrible. and you basically learn from all of those things. That's the thing. That's what makes him unique is that he always says, it's like, I've learned wonderful things from Jaws 3D. It's like he's done some bad movies too, and it's like, but he's a phenomenal actor. And so I always excuse me. I always say, take as much experience as you can. Learn from everything that comes across your desk. Sorry.
No.
Asthma's kicking in.
Oh no.
Yeah. So basically, the name of the game that I try to espouse to younger artists is basically just go for experience. That's the ultimate reward. Money's fleeting, fame is fleeting. The projects are always going to be there. They're always going to look for people that have a very unique perspective and point of view, and a very unique style, obviously, that you can't replicate. And that's how you'll get work. In the meantime, just focus on building a really, really good portfolio, become really good at what you do, and then let the stuff come to you. Keep your feelers out there and look for stuff. Obviously that's perpetual. That's got to keep going. But don't spend a lot of time focusing on, I've got to get to this particular place to work on this very particular project, because it's 90% of the time it's not going to happen.
No.
And so that's go ahead.
From your own journey, and I guess this ties into what you mentioned before about the rat race. And I had a similar kind of thought a few years ago where I just actually observed myself and I realized I'm just doing the rat race stuff. And it's a particular kind of like adventure, it's a particular kind of grind. And I think there's like, yes, it's I don't know if it's an overall negative, but it's just a certain
Yeah.
behavior set that you end up adopting and a certain kind of grind, and it yields certain kind of results, right? But then it's also
Yes.
kind of like part of your identity as an artist, and sometimes it does kind of show you. It's like a sorting hat, so to speak, of like, oh,
Yes.
what you really enjoy, what you don't really enjoy.
Yeah.
When did and if it still hasn't happened, please let me know. But like, when did you kind of get to that point where you realized in your journey, taking on all this amazing advice, seeing all these amazing things that you can work on, and also being part of the rat race too? When did it kind of all kind of click for you? Click, obviously, it can mean different things in terms of as a designer and knowing your skills and your strengths, but also
Mhm.
knowing your pathway in your career and even yourself as an artist, because there's all these kind of different kind of identities that are kind of intertwined into one that make this
Yeah.
chimera type thing. But yeah, if that question makes sense, like when did it kind of all start to make sense, or your identity as a creative and your career as a creative start to like crystallize and become its close to final form, I guess?
Um, so I think I hit I think I hit my peak stride, around the end of my time at Gearbox Software, because I kind of, intellectually, mentally, creatively, I found myself in a spot where I went, okay, you know what, this is a good job. I'm drawing continuously day by day, and I'm actually seeing myself getting better and better, as I produce more and more work. Um, from an ego standpoint, it's like, okay, and I can reach out to all these people that I admire, that I've always wanted to talk to, and I have this platform, that I can actually, talk to them from, and have them see me as an equal, which was kind of a weird bias that I put on myself, because a lot of them already saw me as an equal.
Interesting.
So that was kind of an insecurity that a lot of artists have, and so yeah, it was towards the end of my time at Gearbox Software. I was kind of, creatively, I was kind of finally comfortable in my own skin, as an artist, and so that's kind of where the switch went off in my head, where I just went, okay, I don't really need, to stress myself over needing to work on Star Wars or what, or whatever it is. It's like I'm pretty at peace with that. I have my own ideas. I know who my heroes are. I've emulated them long enough. I'm now my own person. As designer speaking, and it's like, yeah, I don't need the validation of kind of these external influences anymore, or perceived validation. And so, yeah, so that was what, 2017. Yeah. so, so it took me about that long, in my personal journey, as an artist and as a person. Because most artists are going to be, I would say a high percentage of them are hugely, massively insecure.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
Which is why they're artists. Because it's the way it's a form of self-expression, and it's you can be who you really are, on the inside, and put that out on paper or whatever. And so it wasn't until about that period of time where I went, okay, I'm just going to do my own thing, and I'll just let kind of the chips fall where they may. Now, I as a person, what I learned really young, again, this going back to my networking days, or have actually never ended, but my early days of networking full time, is you always have to kind of keep things going. You can't just get complacent. You always have to kind of there has to be some engine churning in the background somewhere. And so basically I keep, I at this point in my career, I know enough people. I don't need a validation of anybody's opinion. I mean, I've already had Syd Mead tell me my work is really good, and so I could care less about what anyone else thinks. Which made my dad made my dad hugely proud. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's basically I like to I keep my feelers out, my network out, and I try to figure out what's going on, like what's the latest and greatest that's going on in the industry. Industry in general, and also just something that's more relevant to what I do. And And I'm kind of falling into the Scott Robertson camp of, okay, I'm just going to experiment on my own and figure out an interesting new methodology that I can kind of evolve myself as a designer into. And a lot of people don't do that. They get caught off guard and they go, okay, I've been left behind. I don't know what to do now. And they get lost. I think it's important to be curious. And I think that was kind of the benefit about that period of time, at Gearbox. Because I was at the peak. I was at the pinnacle of my Nothing But Mech series of books. And so that was basically an opportunity. I mean, the deep, dark secret of the impetus of Nothing But Mech was I just wanted free artwork from all these artists that I admired. so that was my own personal selfish motivation there. And it turned out to be actually something really fun. We donated all the artist proceeds go to charities that we select, and they get a free copy of a high quality book, and so it's a nice portfolio piece for them, and they get free promotion, and but that was fun because then I got to that fulfilled a small ego boost for me. Is Scott said after the first book, Scott Robertson just went like, yeah, this is your thing. I'm not touching this because I had like almost 60 artists in one book, and we're talking about like Ben Proctor and Dylan Cole, and like it's kind of the cream of the crop that I so I kind of lit myself on fire, and so Scott's like, yeah, this is all yours now. So right. I had to basically manage. I became a project manager, which is a new thing for me, and this is something my dad did early in his career as a designer. Is he got tired of being a sketch monkey and so I'm going to be an art director. I'm going to manage art departments now. And so he'd been telling me to do that. And I went, oh, this is actually kind of, I've taken this like a duck in water. It's like, okay, this is actually pretty easy. I like doing this. And so basically I just had to be the cheerleader, and I had to encourage everyone. They were working for free. So obviously I can't put a lot of pressure on all these artists, but I had to manage them across time zones. So we're going like from UK, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong. Yeah. I mean, so like literally a worldwide, endeavor. And I had to work within their schedule, professional schedules. They also have lives with their families. So, I had to kind of be cognizant of all that stuff, and I had to work with all of that. But, in the end, it worked out fine, I think. And so I have a friend of mine who kind of told me he was never in the books, but he was actually the former head of the art department at Industrial Light and Magic. His name's Mark Moore, and he was doing he was working with the Mill, their New York branch, on a commercial, and he said, yeah, the art director that I was working with said, okay, we need you to design a robot. Here's a couple examples that we like, and they put all the reference was just from the Nothing But Mech books. I just went, okay, cool.
Oh wow.
So I kind of spread that information back around to the artists and say, like, you guys are having an impact,
No, just a quick mention on Nothing But Mech. Like, just me personally, directly, absolute influence, like a massive, massive influence. I think at that time, I had to like correct my timeline. My chronology is getting a bit fuzzy, and there was like transitioning from when I finished uni to realize that I don't want to do industrial / transport design for real world. I want to do it for movies and stuff. And trying to figure that out. And I thought I didn't have the budget to buy the book. It wasn't available from where I was. So the local library just opened and it had it. And I had it on constant repeat. Like I made sure I kept renewing it. And the amount of influence it had on me, just to even like see, okay, this is the benchmark. This is what's achievable. Try and kind of decode it and figure it out. And then even fast forward to like when you were doing it on Instagram, and again, similar kind of relationship, just seeing it on my desk, always seeing it like from afar in a way, like, okay, this is the benchmark, and tying it into Shiptember itself. When I did my first one, you featured a few of the pieces that I did.
Yeah,
I've thanked you digitally, but even to your face, like the amount of validation, but also just the honor it was just for you to like just select that and just to be attached to Nothing But Mech. Like nothing can ever like take that away. Like that is just such like it's like a medal of honor in that regard. And then that gave the confidence of like what Shiptember is, and then it's given some kind of extra kind of like nitrous boost to what it is today. And who knows what it's going to be going forward as well. But yeah, man, that just again, like seeing the organic way that kind of became a thing.
Yeah.
And I can give you my testimony as to how much of an influence that is. Kudos
Yeah.
to you, man. It was absolutely, yeah, amazing.
Appreciate it. I'm glad it had a good impact. I mean, that ultimately, that was the actual ultimate, not just getting free artwork for me, but the actual motivation was,
Yes,
at the time when I started the original blog in 2009, blogs were still a thing. And, so, and so that was kind of the go-to place. Again, it was novelty. And so, yeah, everyone kind of jumped on board, willy nilly without any reservation. Because it was a fun new way of exposing, your work to the world. But the problem, I curated it, I got some flack from a few people, not on the, from the webosphere, not from the actual book itself or the blog. But I got some flack because it's like, well, you can't be regulating it to just a few people. And it's like, yeah, I can, because have you seen a lot of the garbage that's out there? It's like everyone has a blog and a lot of it is not good stuff. And, one of my goals was like, I wanted to have a place of high quality work, And so at that period of time, it's like, okay, I had 15 years under my belt and I had already, gotten to know, quite a few people. And those were the first guys I reached out to. And I said, hey, would you be interested in helping out this blog? And they went, yeah, sure. And, they weren't busy. So that's basically how it kind of, kicked off. And so, and then over time, basically it just turned into a matter of screening the artists. So yeah, we bring in like, new artists, young artists, whoever it was, as long as they had, technical and creative vision and talent, that would be able to, hold up to a very specific standard. And, as the books progressed, obviously, I like to lurk. I'm a good stalker, online. And basically, I watch and look at a lot of artists, and I did this for Traverse. I got some kickback because I didn't have all the usual guys from the Nothing But Mech books, and it's like, well, Traverse, I wanted to be more vehicle based, and so I'm going to look at a lot of transportation designers, that I follow, and a few of them I got to know, and so I wanted to bring in some new blood, a kind of slightly different perspective. But a lot of them were basically, they were not entertainment people at all. Some of them were brand new to the industry in general. And, but they had like incredibly sophisticated, work that was like, that could hold, it could hold up to, this like seasoned industry professional. And that's kind of the thing that interests me is, and so the ultimate end goal there is to basically just kind of inspire. But, to inspire people, you can't just kind of open up the floodgates and just let everything in. It's like there has to be a filtering system at some point. And it's not because you're bad. It's just, you have to, take a few years, then you can make it in. That was kind of the mentality. It's like, I'm not rejecting, you're not being outright rejected because you're lesser of an artist or whatever. It's just like, you just need to have some practice under your belt.
Yeah.
And again, that's another lesson you learn from the realities working in the industry. Is like, well,
yes.
There's always going to be somebody who's better than you. And it's like, I know lots of people who are way better than I am, who've been in the industry less, not as long as I have, but whatever got them going or got them into the position that they are, be it practice or be it just like raw talent. I mean, whatever it is. There's going to always be lots of people that are better than you. And I think a good, healthy perspective is, okay, what can I learn from them? How can I improve myself? And I think the death of an artist, death of a designer is complacency. So if you just become, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to do this thing same way I've always done it. It's like, yeah, it works. That's fine if you're Syd.
Yes.
If you're Syd Mead, you can do that literally to the day you die, and people will still pay you for your name because they know what they're going to get. But for the most part, it's like these days now you can't do that. So Nothing But Mech, Traverse, and we've got another book that's kind of in the early stages.
Cool.
Nothing concrete, so I literally can't talk about it because it's like it's just like crazy, wild ideas out there right now that we haven't really solidified yet. but yeah, the whole intent is basically just if we can inspire people to become better artists, that's kind of the end goal. And best way to do that is like, well, gather together kind of this Avengers level team of top tier talent, and just kind of blast that on the world. And Scott said, like, yeah, these are not going to be lifestyle changing books. It's like I get like a very, very, very small percentage just simply for organizing it. And it's the lion's share goes to them because they're publishing it. They're doing the marketing and distribution and stuff. So it's like, yeah, sure, whatever. I just want a cool art book for my for my shelf. And that's kind of the reality. I always present that immediately to the artist coming into it. It's like, okay, you're not getting paid for this, so just be aware of that. You are going to have a cool art book, full of a lot of really, really good artists, and it's going to be a nice portfolio piece that you can show off to. So it's like, are you in or are you out? It's kind of where we are at this point.
Yeah.
And thankfully, most people are like, yeah, this is cool. Let's do it.
So, just throughout all the years, obviously, you've seen Syd Mead at his prime, seen all these absolute legends, worked with them, spoken to them, which I think is super important as well. Like, what you see versus what you hear versus understanding how they think gives way more information than just the final finished piece, for example. But you've taught students as well, you've taught artists, you've, like you said, just observed artists and seen all these different kind of voices from across the world, different generations, different eras, through different tools and mediums. Is there like a common thread or a common theme that you see constantly crop up within these kind of creatives?
I think the thing that is apparent across the board with all the different disciplines is that it's kind of a day job. It's there's nothing really super glamorous about it. It's just like these are artists creating their artwork. This is kind of this kind of touches off into the problem we have with celebrity, is that we have art books, we have behind the scenes videos, they have everything that the marketing department has polished to a T, and they very selectively cherry picked the things that they want you to see, obviously to get you excited about the project so you come spend money and whatever. Talking with all of these people, you just realize, okay, this is a day job for me. It's a day job they love, so they're not gonna phone it in. They're doing a good job at it, but it's just a day job. And then when you work, especially when you get to a studio, it's like, hey, how you doing? Okay, I'm going to work on this now. Got a meeting. Okay, we're going to do lunch. Come back, work on this. Okay, see you tomorrow. That's kind of the mentality. Even when when you talk with like a Syd Mead or something like that, you go to his house, and most of the time, as an example, this is like I think the perfect example. When you first meet Syd, he knows who he is and what he's worked on, and he knows the influence that he's had on the industry and concept designers in particular. So he will tell you the stories about Blade Runner. He'll tell you stories about Tron, about 2010, all that stuff. And he'll bedazzle you, and because he knows that's what you want to hear for your first visit. Subsequent visits, the facade is completely gone. So we just go sit in a studio, and he and Roger and I just sit there and talk about whatever. And that's basically it. Then we go, okay, well, there's a nice Italian restaurant we're going to go take you to. And we go over there and we talk about whatever. It's like literally work does not come up. And the reality is, these are just normal people.
Yeah.
They just happen to work on a really cool project. But at the end of the day, they're just normal guys. And that kind of demystifies the whole image of a celebrity artist. Is when you get to see them and you get to know them in particular as a person, you literally forget the stuff that they worked on, and you get interested in them as another human being. And then that's where you actually learn more about the person, about the artist, about their methodology, is you get to know them. And so for me, that was the valuable part, is, again, so like I mentioned before with Syd, is like we're sitting there just chatting about whatever. Again, absolutely nothing. And he goes, well, you understand, the XB-70 Valkyrie, experimental bomber back in the 60s, it actually flew on top of its own shockwave, the engine, and so he goes into this great detail of research that he did independently about how this experimental plane, the wingtips would fold down and basically it would literally ride on top of its shockwave, and that's how it would basically conserve fuel. And so he kind of go off on this tangent, and I'm just sitting there going like, huh, that's actually interesting. It's like for no other reason other than that's an interesting fact, and it's cool that you know that.
Yeah.
And so that's been my and so I for one of my classes, which I was told after the fact that I was one of the favorite elective classes at Art Center. It's because I know all of this is kind of the funny thing. And so again, anyone from Art Center watching this, it's like this is not a dig at you, but anyway, I thought it was interesting that I think I was the only class that actually brought in kind of the celebrity artists as lecturers because I know them, I knew them, and so my students love that because then they got, first of all, for me, they validated everything I was telling them as fact and useful information.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I got to learn something cool, about these artists and their day-to-day life. And so my first friend I brought in is Landis Fields, and he's in charge of the virtual production, pre-production, whatever, I can't remember what his title is, at Industrial Light and Magic. So what he does, if you watch the behind the scenes on any of the Mandalorian stuff, Landis is there. He's got a big beard. He always has a Lucasfilm cap on, and he's in charge of basically creating the virtual environments that get projected inside of the volume, for the digital shooting. Mm-hmm. And so he basically kind of came in and explained just how easy it was for my students on their budget of zero, how they can actually create a virtual environment. And so he basically related how prior to COVID, he was over in some Scandinavian 3D printing conference that he was invited to. And he was a keynote up there, and the MC had him come up on stage and say, okay, can you give us a breakdown of what your day-to-day activity is at ILM, creating a virtual environment? And he goes, well, obviously they have every conceivable type of Star Wars, model and asset, at their disposal there. Not everyone has that. So he goes, well, usually what I can do is we can go to find some foam core and some cardboard and whatever's laying around the art department, hot glue. He basically just jerry-rigged this thing together, create a little environment of sorts. And he did this on stage with the guy, within a space of an hour. Mm. And he built this thing, maybe a crashed spaceship or something. I can't remember what he said, but then he walks around it with his iPhone, uses the LiDAR scanner, scans that in, pops that into Maya, cleans up the mesh, pops that into Unreal, throws a camera in, a bunch of lights, and walks through, in a virtual environment. It was fun watching my students' eyeballs like, really? Oh, okay. I don't have to have $1 billion to basically, I can just do this on my own, here in my apartment. And that's fun because, he explains like, it's just a very real, ordinary creative process. It just, it's just overly glamorized, by the industry because that's the marketing's job, mm-hmm. is to make these things look wonderful. And it's like, well, it's actually kind of just a day job. It's a really cool day job, but it's a day job nonetheless. And he says, he goes, I come in at 5, 6 in the morning. Doug Chang's there with his little posse of assistants, and they're laying out all the artwork for the season of The Mandalorian, and he's moving things around, to tell the right story. And then he goes, okay, focus on this. He goes, Landis, create that, create this asset. And so Landis will take that and, concoct something using all the assets in their massive asset library there, and pop that in VR and make sure it looks good. And then he hands it off to Doug. Doug goes in there and art directs it in VR, moves things around, places things, switches things up and tells them to change things, and then goes, all right, take that. Landis does a final pass on it and then sends it off to the volume, so they can actually shoot, And so, it's a day job, but it's a really cool, very unique day job.
Interesting.
And so when you actually get to talk to people, and this is the one thing this generation in particular has a problem with, is sure, they're connected worldwide with everyone, but there's a surprising and kind of disturbing lack of ability to communicate with another physical human being. There's a social disconnect there that is absolutely important as a designer and as an artist. Because when you're creating art, you're creating something that's reflecting a culture, and it's got to be meaningful. there's a branch of commercial art where that's artist meaningful to the artist. That's totally self-indulgent.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, commercial art, you're trying to be meaningful to a broader spectrum of people.
Yes.
And that requires you to have actual interaction and conversations with people and to see them as other human beings. And so that's the value. And that's the kind of the through line that I discovered over my time is if you want to be really good at something, track down those people that are good at the thing that you're interested in and get to know them. You know, you're going to learn a certain amount from reading a book. You're going to learn a certain amount from experience, but you're going to learn a whole lot more from actually talking to the person that is proficient in that thing that you're interested in.
And based on that specific thing,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What was the last conversation you had with anybody, any walk of life, or even if a designer, for example, that you took something away from it that like, wow, I didn't know that, or that really changed or impacted me in a way that's significant?
Yeah. Actually, it was one of my professors in my graduate studies. He's a well-known, at least here in the U.S., but he's a well-known sculptor and painter. He's since retired, but he actually kind of cracked my shell as my designer shell. Because in academia, it's this is the fun part about teaching. In academia, you're in kind of more of a safe zone to experiment. There's no budget you have to worry about. There's no expectation. You can actually just have fun and do stuff. And so what he did is his classes were incredibly informal. And so his advice, and he knew exactly who he was. He's friends with my dad, and my dad actually started helped start the school that I went to. So everyone knew who my dad was, but he knew my dad, but he's the exact opposite of my dad, personality wise, creatively. And so he knew I was I had this very rigid, kind of almost linear method of working because I'm a designer. So I'm going for an end product. His best advice to me was just be an artist. So I went, and he's like, no, just be an artist.
Yes.
And so then he kind of thrust me into this whole other world that I'd always tried to avoid because I thought it was self-indulgent. I thought it was stupid. And then I went, you know what? Challenge accepted. I'm in my master's program. Who cares? I'm just going to do whatever I want. So then what I did was I consumed an unhealthy amount of David Lynch. So my siblings and I grew up with David Lynch's Dune from 1984. So we could quote that movie verbatim. We love it. That was my own exposure. My brother later exposed me to Twin Peaks, and then from there I kind of learned more about Lynch, of who he was as an artist. And yeah, he was a total kook, but I actually started falling in love with his way of thinking a little bit, and I went, okay, that's an interesting worldview where he never really spoke in a coherent method. He was speaking very much like a fine artist, like a surrealist. So everything he said was almost metaphorical intentionally. And it's not because he was dumb. It's not because he was incredibly, that's just the way he was. He's a very folksy, almost simplistic way of seeing the world. And that became super attractive to me. I just went, okay, that's actually kind of cool. So how can I fuse my love of robots, technology, of industrial design, storytelling, kind of traditional linear storytelling, with something surreal,
right.
And so, and watching season 3 of Twin Peaks, I consumed that to the point where I was actually having these weird surrealist nightmares. And so, but I've been over the years, it started off as just a fun, why not type of scenario. And then it kind of turned into an actual academic practice, during school.
Yeah.
And it's now something my dad said, actually, you could probably put this in a gallery. You should actually pursue this idea. And so I've actually created this like mech surrealism type of thing that I've been doing, where I'm taking kind of the discipline of a designer and a love of hard surface and just a smattering of storytelling with just full-blown just surrealism abstraction type of stuff, and what that can kind of create. And I'm having a blast because it's more of a freeing exercise. I'm not necessarily learning anything. in particular, other than it's okay to free yourself up and do something that stretches you and that's like diametrically the exact opposite of what you would normally do.
Mm.
And so that goes back to my professor of just saying, be an artist. You know, as dumb as that sounds, and it still sounds dumb just to say that,
Yeah.
but but I like it. You know, it was a fun challenge, and I think most people would have kind of the same reaction that I had. It's like, and they kind of go off and just continue their own, going down their own path.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I think that would be something that a lot of artists, doesn't matter what your discipline would be, is to do something that is the exact opposite of what you normally do. And find a way to allow your brain to kind of, because your brain is still pretty elastic. And so just allow yourself to find interesting new methods of thinking and perceiving. And, you know, have that kind of filter its way into your creative, methodology. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so that's been kind of a fun experiment, personal experiment, and challenged myself as to like, okay, I'm gonna cut ties for a little bit, and this is kind of a way of switching my brain off. It's when you get into a kind of a brain block or creative block where the best thing to do is read a book or go take a walk outside, or just do something to physically get yourself out of your environment and your headspace. And so for me, creatively, this is something I've been doing is I could care less if this appeals to anyone else. This for me, this is just like my own stretching moment.
Yes.
And then of course, I have enough practice. Yeah, I can find a way to work this back into my commercial work if I need to.
Right.
So it's not necessarily binary. It's like something you can work on.
What state is it in right now? Is it going to become a thing, or you just happily let it kind of just manifest and grow and mutate into what it's going to become?
It's going to continue growing and mutating for sure, but it's something I'm definitely going to pursue as its own thing, its own individual.
Right.
This is kind of like the next evolution of me as an artist. And so, I'm absolutely, like I said, I'm very pragmatic. I'm still going to work for a day job. I still like the paycheck, but it's like, I need some sort of fulfillment that's going to meet me where I am at my age and where I am. My creative maturity. It's like I've got to have something that's going to fulfill that need. And I have a complete aversion to making something totally self-indulgent. I really do not. So I was raised in a very egalitarian family, and so it's got to be useful to everybody at some level. So obviously it's not going to be a Lynch type of thing where it's like, I don't know, you guess what it is. It's like, it's like I know what it means, but I'm not going to tell you. And it's like, no, I can't go that far. So it's like
So speaking of fulfillment, do you have like a bucket list of things that you want to tick off, or is there no such thing as a bucket list for you?
Not necessarily. I just kind of take things as they come. When I was younger, I had a bucket list of very specific things that I wanted to achieve, which have not come to pass because of, I can't control the world. Yeah. So that I learned pretty quickly that bucket lists are not necessarily something I need to be involved, because what that does is it adds an extra level of stress and anxiety. It's like, okay, crud, I'm not going to get to this thing at this point. I'm almost 50. It's like, okay, I didn't achieve this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's the point of life? It's like, it's like, I don't necessarily, subscribe to the whole bucket list idea. That's a fun notion. And if you need it, that's great. I have no qualms with people that like to have bucket lists, but for me, I just kind of take things as they come. And again, that's just more of just me at my age, of knowing that things will kind of come to you organically. And it's important just to be aware of what's coming at you. So then you can actually kind of, fold that into yourself and then run with it. It's kind of like a Bruce Lee-ism,
right.
Being like water flowing around the rocks. It's like you can't control the rocks. You just have to be malleable and let things, happen as they happen. And try to assimilate that.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get to the specific segments that we have, I have a couple more questions, but one very specific one. And this is to your 4-year-old self. You mentioned as a 4-year-old, you were looking at your dad's drawings and his work and copying them. Yeah. Do you remember what it was like at that time? That's a very long time ago. Even like, I don't think I can think before the age of 8 even. But there must have been something that, like, were you drawn to it? What made you compelled
Yeah.
to be like wanting to copy these kind of drawings?
It was because it wasn't long after that. I was because he was design director, worldwide design director for Texas Instruments, which is what brought us down to Texas. And so he had industrial designers all over the world. So he had one guy over in Tokyo, and so he'd make a trip or two over to Tokyo every now and then, and he would come back and he brought me back a transformer, which had basically taken off over there. So this is '84, and so basically I was at the very beginning of that.
Was that a figure?
I'm one of those.
Was that an illustration or drawing?
It was an actual toy. It was a toy. And then the cartoons, showed up over here in the U.S. after Hasbro's hostile takeover of whoever owns Transformers in Tokyo. And so basically that kind of consumed me. But prior to that, looking at my dad's portfolio and all of his awesome marker and chalk illustrations of, he designed like some of the first supercomputers, like the ATM machine that John Connor steals money from in Terminator 2. That was his design. Actually, wow. That. Sick. And so seeing stuff like that, and in its raw chalk render, pencil form, I was, as a little kid, that was like the first sparkly thing. I just went, oh, that's really it's like candy for my eyeballs. It looks smooth, it looks neat. That was as deep as I went at that point. And then when Transformers came out and I started looking at the box art, which I absolutely love, you get the really cheesy, awesome 80s, airbrushed box art. And I'm looking at that and I'm starting to make connections now. I'm looking at the reflections. I'm looking at, horizon lines. I'm looking at kind of the stuff that I take for granted now, but it was brand new and wonderful to me at that point because it was shiny and it helped, define a curve and, and so I was piece by piece learning little things like that, starting at 4 years old. And actually on my website, I actually have a picture of me that I discovered because I'm kind of the family archivist,
nice.
Taking old photographs and scanning them and correcting them. And I have a picture of me I discovered. And I went, holy crap, I'm 4 years old. It's like I'm sitting there at my dad's drawing table using his stencils and things like that. And at 4, and I'm looking like an actual artist sitting there. And I just went, wow, I didn't realize it started that early for me, but as I reflect back on it, it's like, it was very much, kind of the surface details. It was the cut lines. It was the manufacturing lines. It was the shapes, so stuff that would appeal to a 4-year-old, bright, vibrant colors, texture, that's kind of where it started for me.
Wow.
And then after that, it started getting a little bit deeper of like, why those things look that way. And then Optimus Prime came on the scene, and that was the end of me. That kind of ruined me forever. So, so that's the earliest memory as a designer of why I am where I am.
And of all the iterations of like, because it's still kind of the same tools we have, right? Even from primitive times, even like wherever can make a mark, you can use to inform a direction or an instruction or communicate with everyone to communicate. And it's evolved over the years. And I was speaking to Aaron Monick recently, and like this hasn't really evolved. It changes its form, but it's kind of stuck and it's found this kind of like, was it harmonic resonance or whatever? Like it's just got its thing, right? And I mean, like the easels, canvas, paper, whatever, we've got digital, all that kind of stuff. It's still kind of the same kind of interaction. But nevertheless, they are different and they all offer different things. Do you have a favored one throughout the time? Like from the truly analog, traditional stuff all the way through to pretty much just, not even using your hands anymore. Like, do you have a kind of favored one?
I still have, I'll have to pull it out later, but I've got like 3 boxes of sketchbooks, of used sketchbooks and unused sketchbooks. I have a veritable art store in my house. I have my canvases over here, paints over here. My go-to is always going to be analog, because there's an immediate, and this is something I actually talked with Syd at length about many times, because he was still very much analog. Until I actually showed him some environment stuff that I did for Aliens that I used SketchUp was the thing for me at the time. It was still pretty early. But I showed him some of that stuff, and he was super impressed with that. And in fact, I don't know if anyone can repeat this because I was only there. I'm the only one there. Anyway, so I'm going to take credit for it. But he showed me his restaurant that he designed in New York City, which is a Basque-themed restaurant. And he showed me all the SketchUp stuff that he did. Surprisingly, after I showed him, the value of SketchUp from a design standpoint. And so I just kind of, wear that as a feather in my cap also. Nice. But we had lots of talks. He and I we saw eye to eye, and we love the immediacy. We love the feel, of a textured surface. But there's also a psychological component. My sister's a psychologist, and she said basically there is a direct connection of your brain to your hand to a piece of paper. Your brain is a computer that's basically trying to solve a problem. And when you have an idea and you never get it out, you're not going to get it out through typing on keys. You're not going to get it out through VR. There has to be a literal physical connection, going from your brain to your hand. And so that's kind of the way to exercise an idea, and so I think that just inherently that's just always been part of me. I have very similar shapes that kind of keep showing up. It's like, Ralph McQuarrie, said, I'm going to butcher this, but he said basically he always had these weird mushroom shaped things that kind of carried over from Star Wars when he's doing the original paintings for Star Wars. But, they all of a sudden they showed up in the mothership from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and they showed up in Cocoon, and they had all of them. And he actually, and he says in his biography, sketchbook, that he didn't know why he had that. It was like a compulsion that big combination of shapes just showed up all the time in his work. And he said it was actually after Close Encounters of the Third Kind where he did the big mothership. He says whatever that was, that basically just kind of obliterated that need to continue using that shape. And so I went, okay, I guess it kind of makes sense. I can see that in my own stuff. And so it's like I have similar shapes, and I think it's more about muscle memory. These are shapes that I'm comfortable with, that I like going to. It's it's like a safe spot, a happy space in my brain that I always go to. Even if I physically draw them, I always seem to find a way back to pull them back in, and I think that at this point it's more of like a signature of my style. And that's, ultimately, that's always why I get hired, when I do these projects, is like, okay, we like this particular thing. And they always point out something I've done. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's that shape again. So clearly somebody likes that. It's repetitive. It's easy to go to, and I can build from that. So it's like a raw piece of clay. It's always going to be a foundation. It's going to be a framework, and I can build off of that. And so that's kind of why I go to that all the time now. But yeah, it's always going to be a physical. For me, it's going to be physical medium that I'm always going to go to. And when I actually use digital, it's like I'm pretty agnostic. It's just whatever gets the idea across. And I think that's again, that I attribute that to my professor. It's like, just be an artist. It's like, who cares about the medium? What best conveys the idea? And so I've kind of pulled that that ideology into my methodology of SketchUp, 3D Max, Maya, I don't care. Just whatever whatever makes it look the best. And so these days, and that's very true these days. It's like top tier artists are creating these amazing keyframe illustrations, and they're using Blender. Meanwhile, somebody else is using some $20,000 piece of software. Some crazy render engine looks the exact same. So it's like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. So it's all about the idea, not the tool.
A quick question about spaceships before we get to the Cryopod segment.
Yeah.
It's a very annoying question, and I would like to be asked it myself. But is there a single spaceship or particular kind of spaceship that definitely clicks with you or resonates with you, or you simply think is the best?
Oh, that's easy. My book Whoosh that I did for Science Studio Press, that was all inspired by I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Explorers.
No.
Came out in 1985.
No.
Okay. That was peak. in my opinion, that was peak industrial light magic. That was like the golden age of ILM optical visual effects.
Okay.
And it was another Spielberg produced movie from the 80s. So it was like one of his many of his library that he influenced. But it was like a young Ethan Hawke, young River Phoenix, and they build a spaceship. You know, they're inspired by these sci-fi dreams, and they build a spaceship and they go off to meet the aliens, and the aliens are these goofy critters that were inspired by Looney Tunes. But they have this big, kooky, phallic-looking spaceship, which is still really cool, but it's very phallic now when I look at it. But they have their dad's spaceship comes in, because basically what they do is they steal their dad's car, essentially, because they're two teenage aliens. Then all of a sudden the big dad spaceship shows up and kind of and swallows them up. That particular spaceship has stuck with me for decades.
Wow.
I don't know why. I just love the idea. It's like a cross between like a semi truck and a camper and a pickup truck. You know, because he's kind of like he's a rural alien type of character. It's a blue collar alien, and but that ship inspired Whoosh, and so I actually have a few images in there that are actually direct homages to that spaceship. Nice. But it's big, it's clunky, it's super industrial. And so when I say golden age of ILM, it's like golden age of actual physical model making, and so you can actually see the actual kit bashing of actual model pieces crossed with like a little bit more sophisticated, molding that they had. And
yeah.
But it's still very much a practical model. It's got weight to it. You can see imperfections. You can see all sorts of fun stuff. That just make it. It was just like, again, it's like eye candy. To me as a little kid, watching that. And so actually, when I was interviewed for an art director position at ILM in 2012, before the Disney buyout. And so I went in there and I was being shown around. David Nakabayashi, who's the creative director of the whole art department there, he's giving me a tour, and I went to the art department, and they had basically just moved into the Presidio facility, so it was still pretty barren. They hadn't brought in a lot of the models and things like that yet. So the art department was basically a giant room full of walled off cubicles with a long, blank, drab-looking filing cabinet, and I think one of the airplanes from Die Hard 2 hanging from the ceiling, but that was about it. There was nothing there yet. So it was kind of a letdown personally when I walked in there. It's like, really? But the one thing that caught my eye, and I threatened that I was going to steal it, was the main Explorer spaceship that was up there, the model that they had, the motion control model sitting up there on the shelf. And he was showing me, he pulled open the file cabinets, and we were looking at Joe Johnston storyboards from Star Wars and stuff like that, which normally would have caught me. I normally would have tried to shove a bunch of that in my pants and run out, but instead I was enamored with the spaceship that was up on the shelf. So that's kind of the power of good design. It's like that that won me over. The model won me over. So yeah, Explorers. Go look that up. That's definitely it's a fun movie of its time. It's very innocent. Watching it now. But it's the director. It's Joe Dante, who did Small Soldiers and Gremlins and stuff like that. So he's
okay.
And so it's kind of it's within that same vein. It's not too serious, not too cartoony. It's kind of fights this middle ground of kind of 80s nonsense. And so, but you can just fast forward to the very end if you don't want to watch the movie and just see the big giant spaceship. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So.
Cool, yeah, I'll check that out. Cool. So let's jump into the Cryopod segment. Now,
yes.
You've shared some probably the best origin stories and just some tales generally I've ever heard in any episodes that I've done. So kudos on that. So there's a lot of for you to pick from, but it sounds like it might be spot for choice as well. But nevertheless, no specific rules with this. However, we're going to strap into a Cryopod. We're going to send you to many, many light years.
Okay.
So you take 3 things with you that you either simply can't live without or you just want to take with you. Do you know what they would be?
Well, okay, I would say I kickstarted a what do they call it? They're called an infinite pencil. It's basically a pencil that's made with a piece of like lead or something at the very end. Basically, You never have to sharpen it; it never runs out. It basically it makes a mark because it's basically scraping up the atoms or something on the paper. And so obviously, as an artist, I would have to have a pencil that would never run out.
Fair enough.
Or a drawing instrument that can draw on pretty much any surface, so that's good. There's definitely going to be a camera in there of some sort. I haven't thought. I was thinking about that. I can't think too deeply about what kind of camera because I don't know.
Okay.
In this hypothetical, what kind of camera would they have out there?
Would that be to capture moments or to help you explore further?
No, it'd be to capture moments because I take photographs of everything all the time. I'm my own personal reference, Morgan. So I have to. I photograph everything. So so writing, infinite writing instrument, a camera. And some sort of MP3 player. It's like I'm gonna have to have music. But let me caveat all of that. The Voyager spacecraft left. It's now entered interstellar space. Mm-hmm. That is. And they call that a light day. That hasn't even made it 1 light year yet.
Yeah, it's recent as well.
Exactly. And so, so obviously, in this hypothetical, the spaceship is going to go a little bit faster than that. But the fact that it's just reaching 1 light day, and then there's the psychological component of. I remember reading something. It was not too long ago. Somebody came in with the semantics of the reality of cryosleep. And it's like, if you're not psychologically healthy, if you have baggage or if you have trauma, and you get caught in a loop of a nightmare, for however long you're in space. So it's like,
that's true.
So I'm thinking about, I was thinking about this question and I was going like, I don't know if I'm really ready to go off into interstellar space. Yeah. It's like, something's going to pop up in there and I'm going to be trapped with it for 150 years. And so I think of the end of Alien. This is why I love the end of Alien Covenant, where David reveals himself to what's her face in the cryopod.
Yeah.
And and you can see her heart rate speed up as she realizes it's David and he's going to kill her and experiment on her also. And he puts her to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, that's the greatest worst nightmare right there. It's like. So she's gonna go to sleep for who knows 7 years and realize I'm gonna be dead. I'm probably not gonna wake up from this.
That's actually a good point. With this question, that is essentially the tagline and the template of this whole episode of podcast series is actually quite a dystopian / scary question. A lot of people even mention now thinking like, okay, those questions are cool, but the actual side effects or the knock-on effects or the potential consequences are way more darker and sinister, which maybe we'll run with moving forward as well. But that's pretty interesting for me as well.
Well, I think I have no problem with this because it's like the thing that kind of drives me nuts when I talk with a lot of. Okay, so this is the other thing I picked up when I was in school, my graduate studies is. It was a passing curiosity of watching young YouTube reactors watching movies for the classic movies like Jaws, for the first time, what they call classics, and for me it's like Casablanca, something like Citizen Kane. They're watching Star Wars for the first time, so it was for me as a curiosity because it's like, wow, they're seeing this for the first time. That was neat. Then it kind of became an obsession, and it kind of became an addiction watching these people reacting to these movies. And I'm thinking, wow, they have zero context. Like, what cracks me up is watching them see Back to the Future for the first time. They have zero idea who Robert Zemeckis is. Robert Zemeckis' shtick is irony. Like, since day one as a filmmaker, he's always used irony in his movies, for good and bad, usually for comedic purposes. But they watch Back to the Future. And Biff Tannen, the bully, the kind of the generic cartoon bully, is the exact same for hundreds of years. His entire family. He always has a posse behind him. Yeah. He always picks on the McFly family. I mean, the But when watching these younger viewers see this stuff, and they're going like, "He's so mean." It's like, seriously, you've never watched Bugs Bunny. You've never seen any sort of cartoon where that's actually supposed to be funny. It's not. But don't overanalyze this. And so I think that's kind of that's why I think this line of question is kind of fun, because there's too much emphasis on the realities, or on the other end of the spectrum, there's too much emphasis on the fantasy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have no problem kind of finding that middle balance there. But I think too much of one thing is can be detrimental, because creatively detrimental. But so that's why I kind of cracked myself up when I was thinking about answering your questions from a kind of a fun, fantastical standpoint. And then it popped into my head this thing I read about the realities of the horrors of space travel, long-term horrors of space travel. I just went, yeah, that's pretty awful. They're going to have to do a lot of serious psychological, filtering on on people who are going to go for these long-term, journeys.
And when you think about it, in a lot of the films where this does appear, they tend to be serious / horror films. So it's never like in the happy sci-fi films or where there's heroes, because they're jumping around happy everywhere. It's always something sinister, something dark going on as well.
It's Event Horizon.
one more question to make. I guess it's not a kind question, of course, because we're going to run with that theme. But you mentioned some absolute legends. You've met some absolute legends as well.
Yeah.
Of all the spaceships they've designed, in particular, or just even their designs in general, you could only take one of their bodies of work, whether it's the entirety of all the marks they've made, sketchbooks, or to finished pieces. As a result, everything else will be deleted, so you have no other reference point. Could you pick one single artist to essentially just rewrite your brain and only enjoy their work in that journey?
Yeah, I think I'm juggling it right now in my head.
Cool.
The pros and cons here. Honestly, I'm gonna have to go with George Hull.
Awesome pick.
Because I enjoy Syd's stuff, but Syd is very abstract. And one of the things I had to do when I was hired for at a Real Effects work on Aliens was he'd actually come up with the bridge design for the Sulaco, which we never see in the movie. But in total Syd fashion, and he has a logic. I mean, he'll explain to you his most abstract piece and tell you exactly how it works, and it makes sense. But just from first glance at it, it's like, this makes no sense whatsoever. It's just pure abstraction for the sake of abstract. That's how it looks. And so I actually had to reinterpret a lot of his designs, for the game, so to actually be easy for the level designers to actually make it. And so, his stuff is fun to look at, and as far as spaceships go, he actually doesn't have a lot of spaceships in his work. It's a lot of aspirational environmental stuff. Yeah, I would love to live in a Syd Mead aspirational environment, but for spaceships, I've always been a fan of George. I mean, George is, and he knows this, so I know if he's going to see this, but it's like, George, I'm a huge fan of your work. I would definitely go for George, because he's found that nice, easy medium that I enjoy of making something aesthetically that's cool, that's plausibly functional, but it's not uncomfortable to look at.
Yes.
So he has a lot of, I mean, even the stuff he did for Jupiter Ascending, where he was influenced by a lot of his Indian heritage, and he actually drawn a lot of these really kind of beautiful wedding, decorations and things like that. Actually infused that into the spaceship, and it made it look gorgeous. But even then, as ornate as that is, it's not uncomfortable to look at. It's very aesthetically pleasing all around, functionally, artistically, and so and he has a greater body of work as far as spaceships go. And he and I are relatively the same age, so it's like we both obviously had the same influences. So I see a lot of similarities of stuff that I would do in his design work. A lot of big clunky industrial shapes that he likes that I find very appealing and very attractive. And so so George would be the guy. If I could obliterate all the other artists out there, George would be my go-to.
Excellent pick. Cool. Next segment. So Dropship. It's basically, this next segment is any design that you have, whether it's something that it's a personal project that you would like to see in an existing universe, or you think would fit in an existing universe, or something that you've already done for an existing universe. Do you have something that you could showcase or break down? Talk about, please.
Yes. So I have opened here. This is basically my process that I went through to create the heavy lift ship that we see in Aliens,
Right.
Colonial Marines. Okay, I didn't put these things in order. There we go. So we have this this kind of monstrosity. I wanted it to be basically like a passenger jet version of the dropship.
Uh-huh.
And so what we have we have this to scale. So this is the model that we had created for the game asset, which was, I guess, to scale to whatever reality that we were working with. And so basically, I just took this model and in Photoshop, the magic of Photoshop, scaled it up, and then refined it where I needed to refine it to basically work into the design that I had in mind. But before we get to this point, I had to kind of work out the logistics of it. So as a designer, I always strive to base things in reality. And this was kind of the mentality that James Cameron is notoriously proficient at doing with all of his work. So his dropship for the actual film was based more along the lines of kind of Vietnam War era military equipment, and his brother, being a Marine, he had to throw in a Harrier jet, which he absolutely loved. He absolutely loved that, and he said so much, with True Lies.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we wanted to stick with, and again, they're Marines, so we had to kind of create kind of an aesthetic consistency. Despite it being the future, there's going to be something that's going to be grounded in a recognizable reality. So what would, a kind of a carry-all type of vehicle look like, in this future? That, this future that was, the other jumping off point that we had to stick with, that we wanted to stick with, was, what does the future look like from 1986? So again, me as a child of the 80s, this was kind of, playground, fertile ground for me to run around in. So I just did, as my design training, dictates, is, okay, I look at something that is relevant, that current Marines would use, or current Marines from that era would use as heavy lift or cargo. So I just do some really, really quick sketches of Chinook helicopters, which I think everyone uses, not just the U.S., but I think every country uses a version of this. And kind of, again, going into my my thought process of Weyland-Yutani's kind of aerospace division, spaceship division, basically reaches off into various divisions or various industries. So, really quick sketch of just to get kind of proportions and very specific details that I wanted to try to hook and work into the design, and then kind of the initial thumbnail sketch down here. And so, just a little bit further, this is me. This is basically my thought process. This is my Da Vinci-esque, way of thinking. As a designer, is I'm not really looking for anything aesthetically pleasing at this point. I'm just looking strictly for functionality and try to work in some of the design details that I kind of was settling in on of modern military equipment that we had tried to morph into something futuristic. So we have the generic, and none of this is really kind of the groundbreaking. I'm looking at existing science fiction IPs, and there have been lots of different spaceships over the years to kind of draw from. As Doug Chang says, it's like there is no such thing as an original design. You just look at it from a different perspective, and it becomes original by default. So just have my original sketch, throw a little bit of tone on there. That's always helpful when especially if you're going to hand this off to a 3D modeler immediately, without working out all the details. So it just kind of gives them a basis to work from of shapes, this basic form language. And then of course, that's where the rockets come from. So this kind of goes to what I mentioned as Doug Chang's 3-second rule that he learned from Lucas was, these are the engines, that's the cockpit, it goes in this direction. So that's kind of like basic design right there that I needed to work on. And so this was the monster that I actually kind of settled in on. I've always loved this helicopter because it's not necessarily It's not pretty at all.
Yeah.
It's purely functional. It's really, really ugly, and they're huge. And I went, okay, that's cool. That fits kind of within the science fiction genre. So you have all these fun little cut lines and details, and purely militaristic, fun doodads and holes and cut lines, just whatever manufacturing stuff. Which is, that's a gold mine for science fiction.
Of course.
Because you're not going to explain all of it. Just, the more junk that you have thrown on there, it usually looks better.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to have a one-to-one comparison, but I wanted to, because these helicopters have been seen, on newsreels and whatever. And again, this is not, we're trying to make this as universal as possible, not necessarily towards a U.S.-centric audience only. So these type of helicopters, or any helicopters really, military helicopters, are fairly recognizable around the world. And so I don't have to do a lot of explaining about what this is. Clearly it's a helicopter, so I'm going to pull specific detail, design features from the helicopter and transport them over and scale them up and warp them to my needs. But I was also thinking about, this is something that Syd Mead talked about when he was designing the spinner for Blade Runner, was there's a very specific reason, you had this like 170, almost 180 degree, bubble dome, around the cab of the car.
Yeah.
Is, and he broke down for me, like his thinking, his reasoning behind that is that if this vehicle is going to be flying through the air, you need to have greater visibility in many different directions. Your periphery can't be obstructed by anything. And so I was putting, that's kind of like, I've adopted that way of thinking. That's the little bit of logic I always throw into something that I design, especially a spaceship. Is okay. So very much in line with most helicopters, as they want to have, they want to maximize their visibility as much as possible for very practical reasons. They don't want to crash. And so, how does this meet, in a science fiction universe where you kind of write the own rules? Like, who cares? This basically, this is like the 80-20 rule. You have 80%, fantasy and fiction, but there's always that 20% that needs to be grounded in something real that people, your audience, can intuitively understand how it works. And so when you do that, that's kind of my 3-second rule, is that if you can intuit that 20%, I don't have to explain it to you, because I'm not going to actually be there to explain it to you. So that's why, kind of the front looks like the way it does. And so what we have here and I think I mentioned it before, but just for a reminder, basically what I had to do was, this ship came up, this was like, if I recall, a quick last-minute request because we needed to fill out the background with something interesting of this part of the game. And so I didn't have a chance to actually fully flesh out the design with my tool set. So I basically gave, these sketches that I showed you, I handed that over to Jimmy Barnett, who was the modeler at the time, and I basically sat behind him and art directed him. And we kind of we played off each other. So he threw out ideas, I would give him ideas, and back and forth. So it was a fun collaborative effort.
What was that conversation like? Was it quite a smooth back and forth?
Oh yeah, no. Jimmy's a pro. Right. I mean, you can. I'll definitely throw a link out for you to post in this podcast, because his work is amazing. He's one of the lead modelers down at Gearbox, and but no, Jimmy is super accommodating. He's a super pro. I mean, he's really good. He's really fast. That's the best part. You can see right here in the engines. What we have here is like he basically built this. I went over to his desk and we discussed how the engine's going to look. How far apart were they going to be positioned? Because down in here, I just did a really, really fast sketch, basically showing that these engines, the forward VTOL engines, are basically embedded in the interior.
Okay.
You can't see them, and you're not going to see them unless you're underneath it, in the game. So, but there's a logic there. I wanted to have this. So again, this is very much taken from like the Harrier jump jet.
Yep.
So you have these 4 vertical nozzles, and so we were working out, the super complex design of the engines here, which is basically just throwing in a chunk of geometry and then seeing how can they actually fold all the way up, or are they going to clash with the back dorsal fin, and so we kind of work out the little logistics like that. This design really was not rocket science. This was this is pretty straightforward, because we don't want to overcomplicate this thing. And you can kind of see right there, I'll send you these images also for fun.
Okay.
But you can see the basic design is really similar. I mean, we wanted to keep this within the same family, aesthetically as Dropship. So the profile is pretty recognizable. The only thing obviously it's not going to have, crazy defensive features like the Dropship, so you're not going to have the rocket pods kind of unfurling in opposing directions there. And then we have and as far as texturing goes, again, since this was going to be more of an environment asset than an actual prop that you'd physically interact with or get close enough to actually see, we played it. And the same thing with the FTL ship is we played it pretty fast and loose because it's going to be in a dark, rainy environment, with lots of atmospheric effects and lightning and what have you. And so we just had to get the idea across this was militaristic. So we referenced the model of the Stosky brothers actually created for the film as like kind of the base for the texture. So this is very much a if it's not broken, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And so that saves us a lot of time and effort on our end, the production end, where you don't need to overthink something that doesn't need to be overthought. Again, this comes down to, I don't want this to be a distraction. This is literally a background piece for the gameplay. It's not the central focal point. And that's something a lot of artists, okay, so there's the novels right there. So that's something a lot of younger artists don't get, because you get excited when you first get in the industry and you think that everything you're doing is going to be the end-all be-all of the project. And you have to realize, no, you're making something for a million other people, that want something. They have an expectation. Also, you're getting paid. This is not really your project. You're an employee. You're kind of a steward of whatever project, franchise that you're working on. And so you have to kind of put yourself in the pecking order, of the reality of that fact. This is not yours. Don't be precious with this. You put in 110% where you can, and then you just kind of let everything else go and let the chips fall where they may. Okay, and then, so just got some more. Just kind of working out the details. Sorry, these are a little out of order, but
it's okay.
Again, most of this you are not going to see. In fact, I think we just dropped this whole concept. I just like this because it would just be a fun visual image to see this off in the background. And this is kind of like how I would explain it. As a designer, I'm telling them like a little micro story, just mostly to sell either the game designer who's planning out the level or the modeler, and I'm just explaining to them like, okay, you may not even see this in the gameplay, but it would be fun to see like on the horizon. It's like silhouettes of these things with these heavy, industrial cables dropping these pods in the background, on the horizon. Just kind of fill out the idea. And so what that does, that information even before I do a sketch, gives them an idea of the possibilities of what the environment, what the level could look like. And so I'm still working out the ideas here of the the front end of the ship. I wanted it to be ended up being stubbier and uglier than this. But it's kind of the ductwork, the piping stuff I'm drawing from, not necessarily just from the spaceships, but just from the aesthetics of like the set designs and stuff. Is you're just going for like super industrial, not pretty at all. And actually, that's what Cameron writes about the Sulaco in the script. Is that he just calls the Sulaco ugly. That's the only descriptor. Okay, here's some fun details. Okay, no, okay, I take it back. I guess we did have it. I guess they actually just didn't do any animation for it.
Right,
So I think we just dropped that whole idea. That's basically, and this is all fun. This is all great. Modelers, Jimmy loved doing this stuff. I mean, you can see the amount of time and effort he puts into you're never going to see this detail right there. That is totally invisible. But he was putting rivets, he was putting welding, he was doing everything into this. And so what you do is, as a designer, this is like Christmas, is when you have an incredibly talented modeler who you basically just give a really quick idea through a sketch. And most of my sketches in this game, funny enough, were incredibly rough because they're strictly for functional purposes only. Yeah. They're only supposed to be seen internally. But that's like kind of the level of trust I had with a lot of these modelers, was I could literally just throw them a thumbnail and they'd go, oh, cool.
Nice.
And they like that because then that gives them the freedom to actually use their talents. So, and then they're more apt to go, hey, come over here and give me an idea of what you think this works, how this works. And so then it becomes more collaborative. And so, for anyone watching, that's kind of the environment you want to foster. That's kind of the environment you'd like to, ideally you should work in, is incredibly collaborative as often as possible, because that makes you a better designer because you understand their perspective, what they're capable of, their tool sets. And you can, it makes you a little bit more empathetic, as an artist, from artist to artist. Like, so you'll know their limitations, but you also know where they can exceed you as a designer. And then that gives you, the ability, when you work with them next time, you go, okay, I know he's capable of doing this, so I'm going to push this even further. And then they go, okay, cool. And so, and then it becomes just kind of a fun back and forth. And so, yeah, so this is like the extent that, for the most part, this is like 80% of the work that I did on all my Gearbox, all the time on Gearbox. It was very, very rough. We're literally just thinking out ideas. And then so we have the final version. And this is, like a lot of back and forth. The design itself, like I think I mentioned before, was basically a week, maybe 2 weeks, to come up with this. But for the most part, it was polishing off, it's doing this was a relatively quick render as well, because, I just basically stretched this out and just sampled, the, the lighting and the texture from the actual model. Yeah. And then just painted my little tidbits here and there where I needed. And of course, as is standard practice, always put in as much real world reference that you can find for them to draw from. And you can see Jimmy actually pulled, directly from this cargo crane. And let's see, let me pop this off. Okay, so we got the basic design. Pretty boring without the details. But then you start adding little bits here and there, some of the interior stuff. And so this, most of this was just move. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so most of this was just flat, opaque, painting and texture. Simply just for speed. And then just carving out the interior. And again, this is nothing really groundbreaking or new. This is all kind of standard practice. But, so as a designer, I'm looking at little details that I know Jimmy's going to, focus in on. So I don't want these things to be just like hard edge. I just don't want it to be sliced off. So we're going to round those corners just a little bit. And this is all this is important information, as a concept artist is. And this I give, full credit to my, my design background is I'm thinking about the manufacturing of this as a physical item. So this would be, these incredibly expensive molds, that Weyland Yutani would have to create, so they could kind of pop, a dozen of these things out in a day. And, there are certain manufacturing techniques that are going to be more efficient, they're going to be more cost effective, so this is the type of information that's kind of like swirling around in the back of my head, as I'm making these design decisions. And that's kind of the story component. I'm kind of telling myself the story to kind of give this thing a backstory, so because that's going to influence all the little design decisions that I put into it. Okay, okay. So lighting. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, yeah. So now I just basically start refining, the rendering a little, just a little bit more. There's some bounce lights in there because obviously it wasn't working with, the side, the scale of the craft that I'm working with the lighting setup of, the Dropship that we had as reference that I was using. So just some manufacturing cut lines, ailerons, flaps, whatever. Just cut lines are kind of like the call sign of science fiction.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
How these things are made. But the trick is, and this is the kind of the funny thing is that a lot of people, and I think artists today who have grown up basically saturated with science fiction are getting more adept at making cut lines a little bit more realistic and logical, because they have to have some sort of logic. When you go back to the original Kit Bash days of Star Wars, and even Doug Trumbull, like 2001 and on, and he was kind of the grandfather of all this process because ILM basically came out of his studio. Is they were literally cutting up chunks of models. So they're and they were also referencing the real world manufacturing of actual machinery.
Yeah.
So there has to be a logic. You can't just kind of willy nilly say, okay, I'm just going to put a line here and a line here and a line here, and it's like, no, this piece right here was all one giant chunk, that they had to weld this piece here, and so there's a very, very simplistic logic, but there's a logic nonetheless they have to put in there, and because you can easily go, and I've done this myself, especially as a younger artist, is I go, cool, cut line, and I start adding detail for the sake of detail, and it looks messy. It kind of ends up looking like garbage. But that in itself is kind of a talent, especially if you do science fiction stuff. Is you have to know like where to restrain yourself, and again, have some sort of logic. Have a very, very, very simple manufacturing story to tell yourself of why this thing is put together the way it is, and then that comes across, and then you can explain that to the texture artist, and he goes, okay, or the modeler. It's all one process now, but you explain that to whoever's making the model, and they go, got it. And I think the thing with Jimmy that we went back and forth on was he started making rivets that were just massive.
Yeah.
So we're talking like manhole-sized rivets all over these things.
Which might be
cool. So I had to keep pushing back, which might be cool, yeah. But it does make sense in this universe.
Sure.
If this is the year, it's like the 22nd century or whatever it was. They're kind of beyond rivets. They've got another process, and what that does is, and it wasn't bad. I kept telling them to scale them down even smaller and smaller. And eventually we kind of eliminated them altogether. I think in the final bit, because what it does is it kind of betrays the logic that Cameron established, which is if you look at a Huey, they do have rivets, but they're usually smoothed down, so they're polished, for aerodynamics, but they're also basically invisible, to the naked eye, because they're the same painted color as the rest of the ship. But having big giant rivets makes us look like we're kind of dipping into steampunk. So you're kind of jumping into a whole different genre of science fiction. And so little things like that make a huge difference going into this process of design. Okay, so what I have here is so just a quick functional layer trick. This is all magical to a lot of people, but this is pretty standard also. I mean, in fact, you just do this 3D today.
Yeah.
But for the sake of time, what we had, I just quickly went, okay, I'm just going to draw this thing. So very much like a Harrier or an actual, a kind of the reverse thrust of a actual passenger jet. It comes in for landing, and it basically just closes off the exhaust nozzle and opens up another thing to basically redirect the exhaust or whatever. Anyway, so it doesn't actually make sense, the way I did this. It just looked cool. I was looking at this point. This is one of those what if, or this is hypothetical functionality. I mean, it doesn't. It's not based in reality. It just looks interesting because there's extra movement, and pieces sliding around, and it's a little bit of extra animation, which can kind of sell this kind of fake logic that you have built up for this machine. And then, of course, you got the Weyland-Yutani symbols, which are all important.
Of course.
Okay, and then so we have this thing. So I designed this independently anyway for the other half of the game that you actually run around inside of, the little SketchUp model. SketchUp was great at this point, this juncture, because I wasn't super proficient with any other high-end program outside of Blender.
Right.
Which actually I got laughed at for using at this point. And now look at it today.
Exactly.
But anyway, but like SketchUp was great because they have this photo match feature in there where you can basically you draw perspective lines, and hopefully your illustration is in perspective, which this thing is not. My ship is way off in many regards. I eyeballed a lot of it. But what it does basically, you can just pop that in there and then say match photograph, and then you draw X, Y, and Z axes lines in correct perspective with the correct field of view, and it basically automatically lines up and distorts your 3D model in perspective, so you can actually just composite in. So you can see where I was way off a little bit of it, but that was kind of like I didn't really necessarily. I just needed something to fill in that space, primarily for scale, because I needed to show how big this thing actually was, because they had already the modeler had already built this asset for the game. So just simple painting, blend it in, make it seem like it fits, and we're kind of good to go. And that was basically the journey of that thing. What do I have here? Okay, next. Okay, there we go. That, and then of course you have to throw that in. Just again to see how big the sucker was.
Mm-hmm.
And this was not, and this was not a small vehicle in itself.
Mm.
So this kind of gives you an idea. This was like a full-on starship. So that was fun. So that was kind of a cool, process to kind of develop this. Technically, it's an actual canon spaceship for the Alien universe, which we'll never see again.
Brilliant.
So, but yeah, this is definitely a fun process to work on.
Lorin, it's been absolutely amazing. So many.
Thanks.
My head's still spinning in a good way from like the lot of the things that you just mentioned and the concepts that you mentioned, and obviously the learnings, the teachings, your incredible journey, even like just almost like the passive smoke of the amazing people that you've kind of like learnt off and developed from by listening to them obviously firsthand as well. Absolute gold. Before
I can't tell you half of it because I don't want to.
I can imagine.
It can't go out publicly.
But before we wrap up the episode, and you've given us so many already, but any final thoughts or words, or even kind of like pick me ups you'd like to share to the audience before we head off?
Yeah, I would say take a break from the world as often as you can, and kind of go off into your own little realm. There's been studies of the benefits of just doodling, and so again, I don't want to keep going back to this, but Syd was actually very proficient at doing that. And there's actually been I think Roger posted published a sketchbook, but Syd would he would send me I was on his mailing list, and he would send me his Christmas letters, his Christmas cards, and they always had these really kind of goofy early 60s, very influenced, like early 60s Yellow Submarine, Pink Panther looking sketches, doodles. It's kind of like a what's the drawing process? Toulouse-Lautrec did it. It's you basically just draw a single line illustration.
Yeah.
I can't remember the terminology. But anyway, so he would do all these like really fun, goofy, very whimsical illustrations of like Santa Claus or just these funny little characters. And he told me that that he would do that all the time. Actually, when he traveled, he would never draw anything science fiction. He would always just have like literally a napkin sketch of just a character, an observation that he saw, and he'd just do his own, very obviously very Syd Mead looking sketch of a caricature. But they looked like something that stepped right out of like a 1930s Bugs Bunny cartoon. I mean, just filtered through his Syd Mead thing. And he said that was his way of basically unwinding.
Nice.
That would be. It literally is just a means of filtering out the kind of the forced or the supposed importance of everything that's going on around you in the world. That your culture is forcing you to think is ultimately the primary focus of your life, which it's not. He said this basically helped him unwind. It basically just helped him just kind of drift off into his own little world. And it's health. It's a health thing to do. It's the exact same thing as like going on a walk. Just go take a walk out in nature. Humble yourself. In the face of the world around you, of the natural world around you. And that ultimately sparks more creativity. Because good design comes from nature. It always starts off with nature. It never comes from the abstract. Just strictly your abstract thought. It's usually going to be rooted somewhere in the natural world. Because James Cameron basically is proving that with his Avatar movies. It's like, I'm going to create an alien world, so I'm going to go to the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. So it's like that's proof right there. So basically, give yourself a break from the world as often as possible, and doodle, draw, sketch, just do something that is completely off the wall, just for your own sanity, and your own your own mental and creative health, and do that as often as possible. And that's kind of a good break from, whatever rigid methodology you have going on that you may be stuck in right now. And I think that would be kind of like the best thing. So draw all the time would be my thing. And not digital. I would say draw analog. Carry a sketchbook and a pencil or a pen, and just draw analog the world around you. That would be my thing to encourage everybody to do often. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Amazing. Lorin, that's absolute gold. Thanks so much for jumping on, man.
Okay. No problem. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.